Today I wanted to talk about confidence, the notion of confidence. Basically, confidence is a word that's often used in CSGO podcasts. It's actually used the most often in CSGO podcasts, though I bet if you talk to like a majority of pro players in other games or other esports, they probably say confidence is actually a key factor in how you win. And the thing about confidence is that it's a very vague term. It's not very well defined, nor does it cover exactly what it means. Like it's it's so like self-explanatory. Like, oh, I think I can win, therefore I win. Whereas it's not. It, whereas like when you go and explain like the details of the team, like the system, like maybe a player's play style or their consistency across events, or like a specific like mistake in a tactic, like somebody didn't run in fast enough, somebody missed a smoke, or maybe the setup on the other side wasn't accounted for within the tactic that was created. Like these are all things you could point to explicitly and then have somebody understand. But confidence is a very like sort of vague term, so I thought I'd like break it down. And by no means will this like cover everything like confidence can account for, because it really depends upon the player and upon the game. And I get if I had a guess for a reason why confidence is talked about more in CS rather than other games, it's probably because like of the short duration of battle time for when fights break out. So like they end usually instantly. So that in that sense, it's like in that sense, confidence really might feel like a key. Like, oh, maybe if I peaked earlier, or maybe if I had the right timing, or maybe if I believed in myself and like when I was thinking about doing that play, like these kind of things maybe they factor in more for that game relative to other games. So let's talk. So exactly what is confidence, or where does it come from exactly? Like I've always been of the belief that confidence is something you gain, not from you gain from skill rather than the other way around. So like the way some people talk about it, they're like, oh, I'm not good because I'm not confident. Whereas I think you're confident because you're good. And the way that like comes about is like, for instance, if there's like a fundamental difference in information between you and the other rival players or rival teams. So for instance, like believe like the envious lineup, the one with Shocks, Kiyoshima, Smiths, that version. The reason they could feel so confident is because Happy, as a leader, had uh, broken the metagame, so to speak. He had developed an entirely new style. So basically, what was happening was they believed at that point that like Happy had broken the game. He had created this style that nobody had ever accounted for, so to speak. You know, the force by style, and then having Happy like the hard lurk be like the star player of the team, and that's where like their confidence came from, and then that's why they all believed in his system for a while, and that's why they could do so well for a long period of time. Like that's one way, like that's one area where you get gain confidence is like basically there's a fundamental shift, or there's like a fundamental gap between the information you have or the information the other people have. So this happened in other games like Brood War, where Savior had way more information about how Zerg versus Terran worked than any other like TVZ player or any other ZVT player, because he basically created the modern version of Zerg versus Terran. And like the reason he continued to have confidence, I, I believe it wasn't really a confidence. It's like he was just such a like, yeah, he created this paradigm shift, but like he also was like a tactical mastermind, the likes of which like had never been seen again in Brood War. Where there are like if you want, you can read the art. It's like God of War Part One by Ver. It's on Team Liquid somewhere, or you can just Google it. But he basically explains Ver explains how Savior's like tactical genius was completely underrated during his time, and Savior basically hit the peak levels of ZVT we will ever see because of like a bunch of like various factors, and then he points out to a bunch of various factors as to why this is the case, or why he's like the most studied player there ever was in Brood War, right? And then that's one way to gain confidence, so to speak. So as like this gap of knowledge. Another way is practice. I feel like this is where the majority of people gain their confidence. Is basically you have to practice. If you practice more than the other guy, then you have to believe that your extra hours will mean something in the overall long term. Like I remember there was like an interview, I forget where, but it was like a TED talk in China, I believe, with Kobe Bryant, where he's basically came up with this idea when he was like in high school. It was like, okay, so basically these other guys they have 2 practice sessions a day. So what if I wake up at 6 a.m. and have a practice session then? Then I will get 3 sessions to their 2 sessions, and then over a long period of time, that will literally mean I will have practiced like a third more than they will ever get to. And by the time they realize they need to practice as much as me, I've already gotten this crazy head start. So that's kind of another way to think about confidence. Is confidence is based off of practice, how much you've prepped for an event, how much you've been deathmatching, how many scrims you've had, like all these things come into play as well. These are all like things that give you confidence. And then there are like certain players. Another way you can think about it are certain players. They don't have. There are 2 types of players you should watch out for when you think about confidence. There's like the first guy is the guy who truly believes he can beat anybody, any day, anywhere. That's like something like Simple. Like I believe even though Simple's like team's results on Navi haven't been that good, that if you ask him, he probably would say like, yeah, I could beat anybody. I could beat Coldzera, I could beat Nico, I could beat Kenny S, whatever. I don't give a fuck, right? Like that's like because he has that superstar mentality. He has like that practice regimen. Like he does have the skills to beat anybody in the world. Like that's a guy where confidence isn't even like a factor. And then the other type of guy where like confidence is kind of like a weird factor to think about would be like Tasia from StarCraft 2, because this is a guy who didn't actually care. It's kind of a weird way to say it, but this guy had one of the best mentalities, I guess you could call it, when it came to a competition, in that he was very calm. He was very composed the entire time, and like nothing ever seemed to rile him up. Like a bunch of Koreans like flamed him, like, oh, you're not as good as the other players because you don't play in Korea. He's like, yeah, okay, and they just kept playing, right? And that was, and like the best quote I've ever heard from Tasia, because he was a very like, his personality wasn't very strong at all, was like basically somebody asked him about momentum, because like, momentum is that famous word like everybody loves to use in interviews, like, oh, do you have that momentum now that you won, etc., etc. And then this happens in every game where like, oh, you have that momentum, right, as if it was like some physical force you could steal from the enemy and then it gets stolen from you the second you lose, right? And Tasia is like, what, all these momentums, like what is this momentum thing you're talking about? It's like, oh, okay. And then basically he said the line like, I don't believe in momentum. Like I know all these other players, they think they have momentum, they need momentum to win. I don't need momentum. I just need skill. Skill is all that matters. And that's basically like, that's like the other type of guy who's like, who doesn't really think about it as like a mental exercise, and they're like kind of very like, they're very, very dangerous. Like the other type of person who was kind of like that in StarCraft 2 was Life. I guess it makes sense, because those two were those two did like play in like the same environments. They did like go up together at the same time, and they did end up like having the most intense rivalry that like basically defined their careers. But except for Life, I guess, because Life's match fixing thing defined his career more than the other stuff at the end. The other thing you can think about when it comes to confidence is another way to break it down is who you have on your team. And this actually goes 2 ways. You can either have a guy who on your team, you're like, this guy will carry us to the finals no matter what. Like this guy is a guy we fucking need, right? And a player like that is Device now on Astralis, where he's basically accepted like this mantle of the superstar role, where like when shit goes down, Device is the guy like people go to, like, okay, you have to get this done, and he's like, yes, I will get this done. Like in the very end moments of like the clutch moments of the game, he will go aggressive, he will make the play, he will try to find a way to take the game, to win the game. Like that's kind of what you need. And then like it also goes the other way, where if the disparity between the superstar player and the other players is too large, like it kind of breaks like the other players down. Like this happened, I think, in Nico on Mouse last year, where like I think everybody on Mouse accepts the fact that like Nico was a player of another dimension. Like this guy was clearly deserving of world championship, like major titles, basically, as an individual player. He was that good, right? But they as a team were having like just such difficulties just getting out of the playoffs, and like basically like sapped all of their confidence because they're like, I keep failing Nico, I keep like they them. And like they try to explain it to Nico. Nico's like, "What do you mean? It's just so easy." Or maybe it's not like that. I'm not exactly sure how Nico thought about it because he's pretty young. So maybe I'm not sure. Maybe it is. I'm guessing it's mostly instinctual, but maybe it's not. Maybe he learned it in like a very analytical way. But either way, like maybe he wasn't able to explain it perfectly. But like when you have a guy like that on your team and you yourself don't have like what I call like, what was it, like the cleaner mentality, so to speak, or like the, there's a book, I forget who it's by, but it was by like the, it was like by like the coach of Michael Jordan, where it's like good to great to unstoppable, where he has this, there's like this specific mentality where like play or like players or people have they just accept mistakes, and then they think, what's next, like how do I get better, what's the next step to getting better. Like these are like obsessive type people who and like it has nothing to do with your skills as much as it has to do with how you approach like a life, or how you approach your goals or your ambitions. And in that sense, like because most of like the mouse players didn't have this kind of mentality, it was very hard for them to deal with Nico, because it was clear everybody with Nico was like I said, a player of another dimension. So like each time they failed him, they probably like, not only did they feel like they were failing themselves, they felt like they were failing him, I guess, in a sense. So it became this like endless cycle where there was no way they could ever have enough confidence to say, I helped I helped Nico win, I guess. Like it's hard to exactly say. It's more like they didn't have the mentality where like they could accept that they were failing, they were kind of failing him. And it kind of went the other way, where like usually when you have the superstar player, like it makes you play better because you feel like there's a weight off your shoulders, whereas in the case of those guys, it felt more like they felt even more weight when Nico was playing on them. And and in the current roster, I guess like the only two players that have, I guess the only three players that remained from Nico's time was Chris J, Lowell, and Dennis. Speedy is gone, and then now they have Ropes. And I guess technically like the team atmosphere is better, but it's also there's also like a bunch of other like mitigating factors as to why this mouse is like more functional than it was just as a team, not in terms of results as it was to the previous mouse. And then there's also the case, and then for confidence, another way to think about it is maybe you have this leader you believe in, like this guy who's like, okay, at the very end of the round, just believe in my calls and I'll get us there. This happened obviously with like Astralis and Glaive, later FaZe and Kerrigan. Like there's like a leader type figure that just like a straight up like tactician who's like who was like, okay, none of us are firing our shots, but if you follow this tactic I created, if you follow like this call I made, we will get there, we will get across the line, and we will win the game. Like if you have that kind of leader, you stop believing in yourself so much as you believe in him. You believe he will get you across, and that confidence in him will in turn like bolster your own confidence, because you believe like that strange thing where you're like, it doesn't matter if I'm off, I can believe in the other guy. And that's kind of like another way to think about confidence. And then there's obviously, I guess you could call it the momentum confidence, where you're winning a bunch, and then because you're winning, you're confident, or vice versa. So, but like this goes to another level if you're talking about championship level players or championship level teams, where there's like where like a player has won so much, so hard, so often, that there's like some kind of fucked up mental like cap when you're playing this guy in like a specific situation where you're like, oh my god, it's like Cold Zero's left, he wins these 11 times out of 10. Like it just gets into your head because this guy is basically like, with his own scale, he's proven he's so good. So he himself is always confident in these results, and then the players that are playing against him like lose confidence, and then that creates some kind of weird cycle too. Whereas like the winning player keeps winning, and then the losing player keeps losing, and then like because the winning player keeps winning and the losing player keeps losing, it creates this endless cycle of like confidence and unconfidence between the two sides. But like I said, you can explain it better if like just say the obvious, like Cold Zero is better than these guys, or is it Nyx is like the best clutch player, or like Kenny S, like he really is the best opper. Like it's very hard. Like it doesn't matter how confident you are. Like you shouldn't generally be beating Kenny S in a op battle, no matter like how much you believe in yourself or how much or any of that stuff, right? And finally, I guess the entire point of this metaphor or this explanation about confidence is that in every in almost every scenario when you talk about confidence, confidence is like associated with everything that is that you could believe in winning. So, for instance, you could believe in yourself, your teammates, your leader, your tactics, like maybe the gap of knowledge, maybe your own practice, or maybe in other things, right? But those things lead to winning. But at the same time, confidence is associated with all of those things. So that's generally why you want your players to go in with a confident attitude, because it kind of unlocks, like mentally, it kind of mentally unlock players. Like it can help them get into that zone where like, yeah, I was this good, or yeah, I was like this is the same feeling I had when I was like the best in the world or something. And like this confidence creates this like kind of mental hypnotism kind of thing where like you kind of convince, it's like a placebo effect maybe, where like you kind of just convince yourself like because you feel confident maybe you will play that good, something like that, right? And that's generally why why I believe like you should be giving your star players confidence, so to speak, by just giving them a bunch of eco kills I think the system that SK uses for the anti-ecos, where they just literally have Fur run out there and kill everybody by himself, and like it seems dumb if he dies, but most of the time he does get it, and because he does get it, like he gets into that zone where you got killer instinct zone he has, where he like basically slaughters everybody once it actually gets to like the gun rounds, and that's kind of what you want from your star players, and that's kind of why confidence is important, but it's like such a vague term, like it could mean a whole different bunch of things. If I had to explain it in one line, I guess it's the famous line that like MVP used when he was trying to explain to like press as to why he kept winning even though he had these crippling injuries, and he says, and like what was the difference between him and Yoda, because like at the time Yoda was like the best player in practice, but for whatever reason MVP was the guy who won the GSL. He's the guy going further in GSL. He's the guy like everybody was looking to as the best like Terran player in the world, and he basically said this line where he said, I've come to the belief that there's like this mentality where winners just win, like, and like that, and for whatever reason, like the best winners in the world have this utter confidence in themselves, and like even just like replicating that, like that's sometimes enough, and that's why confidence is such a strange sort of like phenomenon to talk about when it comes to esports games, because it's so vague, it's so hard to quantify. But it is important. But as to how you quantify it or how you analyze it, that's like a completely different matter. And it could just be the case that I'm not I could be off about that. Like, because the thing about confidence is it affects players very differently from just individual players, like how they've come up to grow into the game, like the players they've played with, the teams they've played with, the cultures they grew up in. Like these are all things that like change like how you feel about confidence or something like that. Like I know, like for instance, like Koreans, like they feel most confident when they practice a shit ton, generally speaking, or like some other players, like they feel more confident when like they're trash talking, or some players like I've seen some players where like they feel most confident when they're under pressure, because like sharpens their focus. Like it depends very very much from individual to individual. So when somebody talks about confidence, these are all things you can think about and try to like pick apart, especially when it comes to like CS:GO.